Hello there, welcome to Nighttime Stories. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Now it's time to unwind. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Before you get cozy, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe. It helps bring more bedtime stories your way. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin. I wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories. Sure, I'd heard the rumors. The whispers about the Northwood dorms being haunted, about the missing student from 10 years ago, about the strange knocking sounds people claimed to hear late at night. But I figured every college had its share of urban legends. I had only been on campus for a month, settling into the routine of early classes, late-night study sessions, and cheap cafeteria food. My roommate Daniel was the opposite of me. Loud, outgoing, constantly surrounded by people. We got along well enough, though I often found myself retreating to the dorm when he went out partying. Northwood had an older, almost forgotten feel to it. The hallways were too quiet at night, the lights dimmer than they should have been, casting long, flickering shadows on the peeling walls. My dorm was on the 4th floor, one of the older wings that had barely been renovated. The room was small. The window overlooked the woods behind campus, and the radiator made strange ticking noises when the air got cold. It started with the door handle. One night, around 2 a.m., I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. The slow, deliberate turn of the knob. Not a rattle, not an accidental bump. Someone was trying to open the door. I sat up, my heart knocking against my ribs. "Daniel?" I called, but I knew he wasn't back yet. He had texted me an hour ago saying he was crashing at a friend's place. The knob stilled, but I could hear breathing on the other side. Soft, measured, waiting. I reached for my phone, but as soon as my fingers brushed the screen, the sound stopped. I waited, frozen, listening. Nothing. After what felt like hours, I convinced myself it was just someone drunk trying to find their room. It was a college dorm, after all. Stupid things happened. But then I noticed something. The peephole was covered. A shiver ran down my spine. I hadn't noticed before, but now that I looked, the tiny circle was completely blacked out, like something, or someone, was standing directly in front of it, watching. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Daniel came back, oblivious, hungover, laughing about something stupid his friends had done. I wanted to tell him, but somehow, saying it out loud made it too real. I convinced myself I was overreacting. Then, a few nights later, it happened again. This time I was awake, sitting at my desk, headphones in, drowning in an essay that was due the next morning. The air was heavy with the scent of burnt coffee and stale dorm room air when I heard it. Knob turning. I ripped my headphones off, my breath caught in my throat. I turned, staring at the door. It turned again, slow, testing. And then, from beneath the door, a shadow. Not just a shadow cast by the dim hallway lights. This one moved. It stretched, creeping inward as if something was pushing itself underneath the door, seeping like smoke into the room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, a knock. 3 soft, deliberate taps. Not from the outside. From inside my closet. I sat there, frozen, my mind scrambling for an explanation. I told myself it was my imagination, that my exhaustion was playing tricks on me, that I had misheard where the sound had come from, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. The knock had been inside the closet. Slow, intentional. My skin prickled with cold sweat as I forced myself to turn my head toward the door. The shadow beneath it was gone. The doorknob was still. The hallway outside was silent. But my closet door, slightly ajar, just enough for darkness to seep out, felt like it was breathing. I stared at it, my pulse hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. My body screamed at me to run, but some part of me, the logical part, refused to move. This was a dorm. A normal dorm, in a normal college. There was no way someone had been inside my room. No way I hadn't noticed. And yet, the air felt thick with something unseen. Something watching. I stood up, slow and deliberate. my chair making the faintest scrape against the floor. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. Movement, breathing, the shift of weight in the dark. Nothing. Just the distant hum of the vending machine down the hall. My fingers clenched into fists. I wasn't going to let paranoia win. This was my room, my space. I wasn't about to start jumping at shadows. I forced myself forward, one step at a time, until I was standing right in front of the closet. My own reflection stared back at me from the cheap mirror attached to the door, wide-eyed, pale. I lifted a hand, hesitated, then grabbed the handle and yanked it open. Nothing. Just the same cramped space filled with my jackets, a stack of shoeboxes, and the laundry I'd been too lazy to put away. My breath left me in a shaky exhale. Of course, there was nothing. There was never anything. I was exhausted, overworked, and psyching myself out over some stupid prank. I shut the closet, locked my dorm room for good measure, and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I woke up groggy, my limbs heavy with exhaustion. I went through my routine, barely thinking, my mind fogged over with the kind of fatigue that clings to you like a weight. I grabbed my bag and went to class, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. The campus was buzzing with its usual energy, people rushing to lectures, half-asleep students clutching coffee cups like lifelines, the distant sound of someone blasting music from their dorm window. It felt normal. But then I saw the bulletin board near the student center, a cluster of flyers pinned to the cork. My stomach twisted as my eyes landed on one in particular. Missing person. The photo was of a student, a guy around my age. Short brown hair, glasses, a familiar grin frozen in time. My brain struggled to place where I had seen him before, and then it clicked. His dorm was down the hall from mine. I didn't know him well, had only seen him in passing, but a cold chill ran through me as I read the details. Missing for 5 days. Last seen leaving the dorm late at night. No sign of forced entry in his room. No leads. A creeping unease settled into my stomach. 5 days ago, that was around the time I had started hearing the sounds at my door. When I had first noticed the peephole was covered, I swallowed hard, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Colleges had thousands of students. People disappeared all the time. Ran away, dropped out, left without telling anyone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't random, that it was connected. That night I double-locked my door. I shoved my desk chair under the handle, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. It made me feel stupid, but I didn't care. Sleep came in restless waves, every creak of the old building sending a spike of anxiety through me. At some point, deep into the night, I woke up to breathing. Not mine, not Daniel's, right outside my door. Slow, shallow, like someone standing just inches away, listening. I stayed completely still, my heart racing so violently I thought it might shake the bed frame. My phone was under my pillow and I barely dared to move as I reached for it, my fingers shaking as I turned on the screen. 12 a.m. A single notification glowed at the top. Motion detected at your door. I stared at it, my mouth dry. The security app linked to the dorm's hallway cameras had picked something up. My hands fumbled as I tapped it open, my breath caught in my throat. The screen flickered, the grainy camera footage loading. My dorm door was in frame, the dim hallway stretching out in both directions. For a moment, it showed nothing. Then movement. Someone was standing right in front of my door. Not knocking, not trying the handle, just standing there. And then, they bent down. I watched paralyzed as the figures slowly lowered themselves until they were eye level with the keyhole. Watching. My stomach turned to ice. They knew I was awake, and they were waiting for me to move. A cold sensation spread through my chest, like my body knew something was deeply wrong before my mind could fully process it. I gripped my phone tighter, barely breathing as I watched the screen. The figure outside my door remained crouched, completely still, just inches away from the peephole. I couldn't make out their face, only a vague silhouette in the dim hallway light. They weren't knocking, they weren't moving, just waiting. A part of me wanted to call out, to ask who it was, to break the silence. But another, much stronger instinct screamed at me to stay quiet. Whoever they were, they didn't want to be seen. They wanted to watch. The realization sent a deep electric dread through my limbs. I stayed frozen, my thumb hovering over the emergency dial on my phone. If I called someone, would they hear? Would they try to get in? And then they reached up. Slowly, deliberately, their hand lifted toward the peephole. I watched through the grainy footage, my pulse hammering against my ribs, as their fingers pressed against the tiny glass circle. Covering it, the screen went black. I sucked in a sharp breath. They knew. They knew I was watching. For a long moment, nothing happened. The hallway camera remained dark, my dorm eerily silent except for the soft hum of the old radiator. I didn't move. My skin felt too tight, my body stiff with anticipation, waiting for the next sound, the next shift in the air. But it never came. After what felt like hours, I tapped the app again, refreshing the feed. When the camera flickered back to life, the hallway was empty, no sign of anyone. The peephole was clear. But something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been outside wasn't gone, that they were still nearby, listening. The air in my dorm suddenly felt heavier, the walls closing in, the silence too sharp. I had to check. I had to know. Heart pounding, I slipped out of bed and moved toward the door as quietly as I could, my bare feet making no sound against the cold floor. My hands were damp with sweat as I reached for the knob, pressing my ear against the wood, straining to hear anything beyond it. I inhaled deeply, bracing myself. Then, I yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. Just the dull hum of the exit sign at the far end, the distant murmur of someone's TV behind a closed door. Nothing unusual. Except for one thing. A small, folded piece of paper lay on the ground right outside my room. I stared at it, my skin crawling with unease. It hadn't been there before. Slowly, I crouched and picked it up, unfolding it with trembling fingers. There was only one sentence scrawled across the page in uneven handwriting. I like watching you sleep. A wave of nausea rolled through me. My fingers gripped the paper so tightly it crumpled in my palm. Someone had been inside the dorm building, standing at my door, watching me. Maybe for days. I slammed the door shut, locked it, then shoved my desk chair under the handle again. My breaths were coming too fast, my mind racing through every possibility. Every time I had dismissed the strange noises, the shifts in the air, the creeping sense of being watched. This wasn't in my head, it wasn't some prank. Someone was fixated on me, and they were getting closer. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the building, every whisper of the wind against the window made my skin prickle with paranoia. I kept the dorm lights on, my back pressed against the wall, watching the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. But nothing happened. No more knocks, no more notes. Just an unbearable silence stretching through the early hours of the morning. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to move. My limbs ached from tension, my thoughts clouded with exhaustion, but I couldn't stay here any longer. I needed to do something. By the time I made it to campus security, my hands were still shaking. I showed them the note, explained the knocking, the covered peephole, the motion alert from my phone. The officer behind the desk listened with a concerned expression, nodding as I spoke. But when I finished, his response made my stomach twist. "We'll look into it," he said. "But there's not much we can do unless an actual crime was committed." I felt my breath catch. "What do you mean?" "Someone was outside my room in the middle of the night. They left this." I held up the crumpled paper, but he only sighed. Look, dorms have hundreds of students. Pranks happen all the time. And unless we have footage of someone breaking in, it's not really a police matter." I stared at him, my pulse drumming in my ears. "So that's it? You're just going to ignore this?" "We'll increase patrols in your building," he offered. "If anything else happens, let us know." I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed the note and walked out. For the rest of the day, I tried to go about things normally, but everything felt off. I couldn't focus in class. I kept scanning the lecture hall, searching for any familiar face from the footage. Was it someone I knew? Had they been watching me all along? When I returned to my dorm that evening, my hands were slick with sweat as I unlocked the door. I braced myself for something, another note, a new sign that they'd been back, but the room was exactly as I had left it. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. I sat on the bed, my mind churning. The feeling of being watched hadn't left me. If anything, it was worse, stronger. And then, my phone buzzed. A new motion alert. I swallowed hard, my fingers hesitating before tapping the notification. The camera feed loaded, flickering slightly, and when it cleared, I stopped breathing. The hallway was empty, but the door to my dorm was slightly open. My entire body locked up. I had locked it. I was sure I had locked it. A single realization took hold, icy and paralyzing. They weren't outside anymore. They were already inside. I didn't move, didn't blink. My breath barely passed my lips as my gaze flicked toward the closet door. Just like before, it was slightly ajar. The air in the room felt suffocating, pressing down on me from all angles. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, my hands barely able to keep steady. 901, what's your emergency? I opened my mouth to speak, but before a sound could leave my throat, the closet door creaked open. The line went dead. The next thing I remember is running, sprinting down the hall, pushing past anyone in my way, my only thought getting out. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air under the cold glow of the streetlights. The police arrived within minutes. They searched my dorm, questioned my neighbors, even checked security footage. But in the end, they found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no figure on the cameras, no fingerprints but my own. They suggested I might have imagined it, that I had left my door unlocked and the wind had pushed it open, but I knew better. I didn't go back. That same night, I packed my things and stayed with a friend off campus. The next morning, I put in a request for a room transfer. A week later, I moved to another dorm in a different building. For a while, nothing happened. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I was safe now. But sometimes, late at night, I would wake up with the same suffocating feeling. The sensation that someone was there, just beyond my line of sight, standing in the shadows, waiting. And a few weeks later, when I was scrolling through my phone, trying to clear out my old notifications, I saw it. An unread message. No name, no number. Just a single text sent the night I fled my dorm. You were right to run. I had always been careful when using Craigslist. I wasn't reckless or naive. I knew the risks, the horror stories, the unsettling encounters people had shared online. But I also knew that if you were smart, cautious, and paid attention to red flags, you could find great deals. That's all I had been looking for. A simple, no-hassle transaction. Something cheap and easy. It started with an ad. Moving sale. Furniture, electronics, must go ASAP. The seller claimed he was relocating for work and needed everything gone quickly. The pictures looked legitimate. A sleek black leather couch, a nearly new flat-screen TV, a set of modern bookshelves. Items that under normal circumstances would cost a small fortune, but were being offered for a fraction of their worth. I was interested in the TV. It was listed at $150, practically a steal for a model that looked barely used. I sent a quick message, expecting to either be ignored or told it had already been sold. Instead, I got a reply almost instantly. Still available. You can pick it up tonight if you want. Cash only. The quick response was surprising, but I wasn't about to question my luck. I asked for the address, and he provided it without hesitation. It was a house about 30 minutes away, in a neighborhood I wasn't too familiar with, but wasn't far enough to raise any alarms. I had been prepared to drive out there alone, but at the last minute I asked my roommate, Dylan, if he wanted to come along. Just in case. He agreed without much thought, and as we drove, we joked about all the ways Craigslist deals could go horribly wrong. If I get murdered over a cheap TV, I said, grinning, just know I died doing what I love. Saving money. Dylan snorted. Nah, man, you die, I'm selling your car on Craigslist next. We laughed, but as we got closer, something about the area unsettled me. The houses were spaced farther apart. The streetlights were dim, and the overall atmosphere felt off. I chalked it up to my mind playing tricks on me. When we finally arrived, I frowned at the house. It wasn't run down, but it looked vacant. No curtains, no visible furniture through the windows, just dark, empty spaces. The yard was overgrown, the driveway cracked and uneven. Something about it felt wrong, in a way I couldn't articulate. Dylan noticed it too. Are we sure someone lives here? I hesitated before stepping out of the car, phone in hand. Only one way to find out. I texted the seller, "Hey, I'm here." A few seconds passed, then, "You're open, come in." A chill crept up my spine. I turned to Dylan, showing him the message. He frowned. "Dude, that's weird." I nodded. "Really weird." I typed back, "Could you come outside? I just want to make sure I'm at the right place." No response. Dylan shifted on his feet. "I don't like this. Let's just leave." I wanted to agree. Everything in me was screaming that this was wrong, that no cheap TV was worth stepping foot in that house. But before I could say anything, the front door creaked open. It swung inward just enough to reveal the darkness inside. A sliver of the interior, pitch black, utterly silent. There was no movement, no footsteps, no sign of anyone. I didn't want to go in. I wasn't going in. Then we heard it. A faint, distant sound. It wasn't talking, not footsteps, not the shifting of furniture. It was breathing, slow, deliberate, deep inhales and exhales, coming from somewhere inside the house. Dylan took a step back. Nope. Hell no. I wasn't going to argue. I turned on my heel, ready to bolt when my phone vibrated in my hand. I glanced down. A new text? "Iris, I see you." A sudden burst of adrenaline shot through me. I grabbed Dylan's arm and yanked him toward the car, my heart hammering. We didn't waste a second. We got in, locked the doors, and peeled out of there so fast my tires screeched against the pavement. Neither of us spoke for the first few minutes of the drive. I could barely process what had happened, my brain still stuck on that suffocating feeling, the presence inside that house, the sound of someone just standing there, breathing, waiting. I checked my phone again, half expecting another message, but there was nothing. Just that last text, sitting on my screen like a taunt. "I see you." I don't know what would have happened if we had gone inside. I don't want to know. But I do know one thing. I'm never buying anything off Craigslist again. I never considered myself a paranoid person. I was rational, logical, the kind of person who double-checked the locks at night but never dwelled on what might be lurking in the dark. That all changed when I moved into the apartment on Sycamore Street. I had found the listing online. A one-bedroom, third-floor unit in an old, pre-war building that had just the right amount of charm and history. It wasn't cheap, but it was in my budget, and after years of roommates and shared spaces, I was eager for solitude. The landlord, an older man with tired eyes and a cigarette-stained voice, handed me the keys without much conversation. "Quiet building," he muttered. "Good neighbors. Just keep to yourself." I should have known then. The first few nights were uneventful. The apartment was small but cozy, with high ceilings and creaky wooden floors that groaned under my steps. I spent my evenings unpacking, arranging furniture, and getting used to the rhythm of the place. Occasionally I'd hear muffled sounds from the units beside me, footsteps above, a door closing in the hallway, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then I started noticing things. At first they were small details, easy to dismiss. A kitchen cabinet I could have sworn I closed being slightly ajar in the morning, my keys not quite where I left them, the lingering scent of cigarette smoke despite no one in the building appearing to smoke. It unsettled me, but I convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, it was an old building. Things shifted. I was just adjusting. Then came the knocks. They started around midnight. Faint, rhythmic, always 3 soft taps against my front door. The first time, I hesitated before checking the peephole. The hallway was empty. No shadows under the door, no lingering presence. I chalked it up to pipes, the wind, Anything but someone actually knocking. But it happened again, and again, and again. I started keeping my phone by my bed, half expecting to need it, but the knocking never escalated. Just those same steady 3 taps, like a question waiting for an answer. Then, one night, I woke up to something worse. It wasn't the knocking this time. It was a sound, the distinct, deliberate click of my front door unlocking. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. I was certain I had locked it. I always did. My throat tightened as I strained to hear, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting. The door didn't open. No footsteps followed, but I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Stress, sleep deprivation. I double-checked the lock before leaving for work, pulling the door hard to make sure it was secure. That night I placed something small, a stray penny, on the doorknob. It was a stupid test, but I needed proof. When I woke up, the penny was on the floor. I stared at the penny for a long time, my mind scrambling for explanations. Had I brushed against the door in my sleep? Had some shift in the air knocked it off? No, that wasn't possible. Someone had touched the knob. Someone had been inside. I checked every inch of the apartment. The windows were locked, the closet was empty, no signs of a break-in. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night I pushed a chair against the door. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like I had some control. I went to bed with my phone clutched in my hand, my heart racing at every creak and groan of the old building. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the knocking started. 3 soft taps. I held my breath. Then the doorknob turned. It didn't rattle violently, didn't shake like someone was trying to force their way in. It just turned, slow and deliberate, testing. I could hear the soft scrape of metal, the quiet pressure of someone pushing, just slightly, against the door. The chair held. I sat up in bed, my stomach twisting. I wanted to call the police, but what would I even say? That someone might be trying to get in? That I thought someone had been inside before? There was no real evidence, no forced entry, no threats, just a locked door and an unlocked one. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The knob stilled. The hallway beyond my door was silent. I stayed awake until dawn. By morning, my fear had turned into something else. Determination. I needed proof. I needed to know that I wasn't losing my mind. So I bought a cheap security camera. I set it up in my living room, angled toward the door. If someone was messing with me, I'd have evidence. That night, I locked up as usual, placed another penny on the doorknob, and went to bed with my phone screen glowing beside me. I barely slept. By morning, the penny was on the floor again. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, pulling up the footage. The screen was grainy, the dim glow of the hallway light giving the apartment an eerie, washed-out look. I scrubbed through the timeline, scanning for movement. At 12:03 a.m., the feed glitched. Just for a second, just long enough to make my stomach drop. Then the frame settled. The door, the knob turning, and just before the feed cut out completely, I saw it. A hand, pale, thin, pressing against the peephole from the outside. I dropped my phone. My breath hitched in my throat as my mind tried to process what I had just seen. A hand, someone's hand, covering the peephole. They had been standing there, listening, waiting. And somehow, they had known about the camera. I forced myself to pick up my phone again, my hands trembling as I replayed the footage. The feed had cut out completely after that moment, leaving nothing but a frozen frame of the door, the knob still slightly turned. I tried to convince myself that it could have been a malfunction, a glitch in the camera, but deep down, I knew the truth. Someone didn't want to be seen. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, checking the locks obsessively, listening for any sign that I wasn't alone. I barely ate. Every noise from the hallway made my skin crawl. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? That someone knocked on my door and touched my peephole? They'd brush it off. I needed something undeniable. That night I made a plan. I pushed the chair against the door again, but this time I didn't go to sleep. Instead, I sat in the living room with the lights off, phone in hand, recording. If they came back, I'd hear them. I'd see them. The wait felt endless. Hours dragged by in suffocating silence. My eyelids grew heavy, but I refused to let myself sleep. Then, at 12:03 a.m., the knocking came. 3 soft taps. I gripped my phone tighter, barely breathing. Then the doorknob turned. Slowly, carefully, like someone testing to see if I'd forgotten to lock it. The chair creaked under the pressure, holding firm. But this time, there was something else. A sound. A low, muffled breathing. Not heavy, not aggressive, just calm, steady breaths, as if whoever was outside was patient. Waiting. I felt cold all over. My fingers hovered over my phone screen, about to dial 911, when I heard something that made my stomach drop. A whisper, right outside the door. "I see you." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My body had gone rigid with pure terror. It wasn't loud, wasn't a threat, just a statement, quiet and sure, like they already knew how this would end. And then silence. No footsteps, no retreating sounds, just the overwhelming, paralyzing quiet of an empty hallway. I stayed like that until the first light of morning crept through my window, my body frozen in place, my mind racing. Whoever they weren't trying to break in. They were waiting for me to open the door. Morning didn't bring relief. If anything, the daylight only made things worse. There was no denying what had happened anymore. Someone had been outside my door, whispering, waiting. Someone knew I was there. I needed out. I packed a bag with essentials. Wallet, keys, phone, anything I could grab with shaking hands. I wasn't sure where I was going. Maybe a hotel, maybe a friend's place. I just knew I couldn't stay here another night. But before I left, I had to check something. I hesitated at the door, heart pounding, then crouched down and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, just the dim yellow glow of the overhead lights. But the air felt wrong, like something had just been there, standing close enough for me to feel its presence through the door. I reached for the knob, then stopped. Something was taped to it. A single piece of paper, folded neatly. My throat tightened as I pulled it off, my fingers trembling. The note was short, written in messy, slanted handwriting. "You locked the door. Good." I dropped it like it burned. My legs felt weak, my stomach twisted. The meaning was clear. They had tried to get in, and they had wanted me to know. I should have left then. I should have grabbed my bag and never looked back. But fear does strange things to the mind. Instead of running, I did something stupid. I checked the security camera. The footage loaded slowly, the grainy image of my front door appearing on the screen. I skipped through the timeline, stopping at 12:03 a.m. My breath caught. At first, there was nothing. Then, movement. A shadow just at the edge of the frame. A figure, stepping forward. They were tall, unnervingly thin, wearing dark clothing that seemed to blend into the walls. But the worst part, the part that made my skin crawl, was their face, or rather, the lack of one. The person had something pulled over their head. A mask, maybe? A hood? There were no features, no eyes, just a smooth, blank surface, staring directly at the camera. Then, they raised a hand. Slowly, deliberately, they reached forward and covered the lens. The footage cut out. I shut off my phone and backed away from the door, my entire body screaming at me to go. Now. I didn't stop to grab anything else. I yanked open the door, half expecting someone to be standing there, but the hallway was empty. My legs felt unsteady as I forced myself to walk, not run, just walk, toward the stairwell. I was almost at the exit when I heard it. A door opening. Not mine. One further down the hall. I didn't look. I didn't turn around. I just ran. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for air in the cold morning light. The streets were empty, the city still waking up, but my mind was racing. I needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere with people. I ducked into a cafe a few blocks away, hands still shaking as I ordered a coffee just to have an excuse to sit. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't want to look, but I did. A new notification from my security app. I hesitated before opening it, dread curling in my stomach. The camera had recorded one last clip before I left. I pressed play. The footage was short, only a few seconds, the hallway still and silent. Then the door at the end of the hall creaking open. A figure stepped out. Not a stranger, not someone masked or hooded. It was my neighbor. The quiet man who lived a few doors down, the one I had only seen in passing, the one who never spoke. He was still wearing the same dark clothes from the footage, but now, in the clarity of daylight, I could see his face. Expressionless, calm, like he hadn't just spent nights knocking, whispering, trying to get in. Then, just before the video ended, he turned to look directly at the camera. And he smiled. I left the city that day. I called my landlord, told him I was breaking my lease, and never set foot in that apartment again. I never went to the police. What would I even say? That my neighbor was standing in the hallway at night? That he smiled at a camera? There was no crime, no real evidence of anything, just a feeling. A deep, bone-chilling certainty that if I had opened my door that night, I wouldn't be here to tell the story. I don't know what he wanted. I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I still wake up thinking I hear 3 soft knocks against my door. And I will never, never check to see who it is. I met him when I was 8 years old. At first there was nothing unusual about him, just another kid in the neighborhood. His name was Darren, and he had this quiet, almost still way of carrying himself, like he was always listening but never truly present. We became friends because, at that age, friendship is simple. You live close, you play together, and that's all there is to it. But looking back now, I realize there were signs, things that should have made me run the other way. Like the way he never seemed afraid of anything, or the way he smiled whenever something got hurt. I remember the first time I saw that look on his face. We were 10, playing in the woods behind my house when Darren spotted a bird with a broken wing. It was small, helpless, twitching on the ground. I wanted to help it, to take it home, maybe tell my mom. Darren just stared. Then, before I could stop him, he picked up a rock and smashed it down. The bird squealed once, then went silent. I froze. Darren, what the hell? He looked at me, tilting his head like I had asked something strange. It was already gonna die. I felt sick. I wanted to run home, to get away from him. But he just stood there, completely unbothered. That should have been the moment I realized something was wrong with him. But I was a kid, and kids don't always understand danger when it's staring them in the face. So I stayed friends with Darren. And over the years, things only got worse. As we got older, Darren's fascination with things he shouldn't do only grew. At first it was little things. Stealing candy from the store, sneaking into places we weren't supposed to be. But there was always something off about the way he did it. He never stole because he wanted something. He stole because he liked the thrill of taking it. He liked knowing he could get away with it, and when he didn't, he never looked guilty. I remember the time he got caught pocketing a lighter at the gas station. The clerk grabbed his wrist, threatened to call the cops, and while I stood there panicked, Darren just stared at him. Not angry, not scared, just watching, like he was waiting to see what the man would do next. The guy let him go with a warning, and as soon as we walked out, Darren smiled. Voila? It was bluffing, he said, like it was a game. Then there was the incident with the neighborhood cat. Fluffy little thing, belonged to this old lady down the street. One day it went missing. Posters went up, people searched, but no one found a trace. Except I did. Or at least, I found Darren sitting behind his garage with a knife, his hands dirty, something half buried in the dirt. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know. But I remember the way he looked at me when he noticed I was there. Like he wasn't ashamed, wasn't guilty, just curious about what I'd do next. I wish I had told someone then. Maybe if I had, things wouldn't have gone as far as they did. By the time we hit high school, I started pulling away from Darren. He wasn't just a weird kid anymore, he was dangerous. The way he talked about people was unsettling, like they were nothing more than objects. He could be charming when he wanted to be, though. He had a way of making teachers love him, convincing people to do things for him, making girls think he actually cared about them. But I knew better. I had seen the way he enjoyed hurting things, the way he only ever seemed truly alive when he was causing chaos. I didn't want to be around for whatever he had planned next. And then one night I got a call. It was late, sometime past midnight, and my phone buzzed on my nightstand. I groggily grabbed it, squinting at the screen. It was Darren. He never called. He wasn't the type to need people. Something in my gut told me not to answer, but I did anyway. "Hello?" My voice was thick with sleep. There was silence for a moment, just static and breathing. Then, in a calm, almost casual tone, he said, "I did something bad." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then, barely above a whisper, "I need your help." I sat up, suddenly wide awake. Every instinct told me to hang up, to not get involved. But Darren had a way of pulling people in, making you feel like you had to do what he wanted. Against my better judgment, I asked, "Where are you?" "Come to the old train tracks. Near the woods." Then he hung up. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. I should have gone back to sleep. I should have ignored it. But something about his voice, the calmness of it, unsettled me. I got dressed, grabbed my bike, and rode out. The train tracks were abandoned, stretching through the woods like a forgotten scar. The night was cold, my breath visible in the air as I pedaled faster, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. When I got there, Darren was standing near the edge of the trees, hands in his pockets, completely still. The way he stood there, waiting, sent a chill through me. I got off my bike and took a hesitant step forward. "What's going on?" He turned, and that's when I saw it. Behind him, half hidden in the brush, was a body. For the sake of privacy, I won't be using real names. Even now, years later, I don't know if he's still out there. I don't know if he ever got caught. But if he is, I don't want my name tied to any of this. I'll call him Darren. And the person lying in the dirt that night, I won't give them a name at all. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the body. My brain refused to accept what I was looking at. It didn't seem real, the way the limbs were twisted, the way the face was turned just slightly away from me, just enough so I didn't have to look them in the eye. I swallowed hard. "Darren? What did you do?" He tilted his head, watching my reaction with that same eerie curiosity I'd seen in him since we were kids. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he muttered, his tone almost casual, like he was talking about a broken toy, not a dead person. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run, but Darren just sighed. "Look, I didn't call you to freak out. I called you because I need your help." I shook my head. No, I'm not." He took a step closer. I could barely see him in the dim light, but I could feel the weight of his stare. "You are going to help me, unless you want to be just as guilty as I am." My stomach twisted. Guilty. That word clung to me like tar, thick and suffocating. I hadn't done anything, but I was here, wasn't I? I was standing next to a body in the middle of the woods, the only other person around being a guy I had known for years, a guy I had ignored the warning signs about. And just like that, I realized he had planned this. Not the killing, maybe, but calling me, making sure I was involved, making sure I couldn't just walk away. That part was on purpose. I was trapped. My whole body was screaming at me to turn around and run, but my legs wouldn't move. I kept staring at the body, my mind desperately trying to convince itself that this wasn't real, that maybe it was some kind of sick joke, but it wasn't. The air smelled like iron, the dirt beneath the body looked dark and wet, and Darren, if that was even the name I should be using, stood there, watching me, waiting. My voice caught in my throat. "I don't know what you expect me to do." Darren sighed, almost like he was disappointed in me. I expected you to not be such a little bitch about this." He turned and kicked the dirt near the body, shifting some of the leaves over it. "We need to move it. There's a creek not far from here." That was it. That was the moment I realized he wasn't panicked. He wasn't regretting anything. He was calm. He had already thought this through. I took another step back, feeling my breath quicken. "I'm not helping you." Darren's jaw clenched, but he didn't move toward me. He just tilted his head slightly, like he was analyzing me, running through his next move. That's what always unsettled me about him. He didn't react like a normal person. He calculated. He weighed his options. And right now, I was one of those options. "You really want to go to the cops?" His voice was quiet, almost amused. "You think they'll believe you had nothing to do with it?" I swallowed hard. I hadn't done anything, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. We had been friends for years. I had ignored so many red flags. Who would believe that I just happened to get a call in the middle of the night and showed up next to a dead body with no involvement? I didn't answer. Darren took that as hesitation, and he pounced on it. "I called you first. Your phone's going to show you were here. You ran with me when we used to steal shit as kids. People saw us together all the time. I tell them you were here when it happened? That we planned this together?" He smiled. "I guarantee you they believe me over you." I felt sick. I could barely hear anything over the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Darren had put me in checkmate before I even knew we were playing a game. I had two choices, help him or find a way out. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing in circles. I could feel the sweat building at the back of my neck, my hands clammy and shaking. Darren's words echoed in my head, and for a moment, I truly believed I had no choice. But then something clicked, a sudden sharp clarity, like a light bulb flickering on in the dark. I did have a choice. I could walk away, I could run, I could scream, but I had to do something before this all spiraled further. I swallowed, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm leaving." Darren's eyes narrowed, and I saw something flicker in them. Anger, maybe even a flash of disbelief. He stepped closer to me, but I didn't back down. I met his gaze, and for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. "You think you're just going to walk away from this?" His voice was low, cold. "You're with me or you're against me. That's how this works." I shook my head, my mind racing to find a way out, a way to end this without being caught up in any more of his madness. My fingers fumbled in my pocket, reaching for my phone, the small, hidden device I had switched off earlier because I knew Darren was smart enough to check if I was recording. The minute I pulled it out, though, Darren's eyes locked on it. He lunged toward me, but I was already pressing the emergency 911 button, and before he could grab me, the call connected. "Help!" I shouted, my voice shaky. "I'm with someone. I'm in danger. Please, someone, help!" Darren froze. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He just stared, as if for the first time in his life something was out of his control. It didn't matter. The dispatcher had already heard enough. The sirens came within minutes. I don't know what happened to Darren after that. I was taken to the station where I gave my statement, using a fake name for my own safety. The body in the woods was identified, and Darren was arrested hours later. There were no charges I could be tied to, no evidence that I had helped him. But I didn't trust the system. I couldn't. I packed up my things soon after and moved away. The memories of Darren, his calm smile, his twisted sense of control, still haunt me. Even now, I keep my distance from people like him. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, but more than that, I wonder how many other people he's convinced to do his bidding, because someone like Darren, he doesn't stop until he gets what he wants. I've always been fascinated by the internet, not just the surface web, the part everyone uses daily, but the deeper layers, the kind of places you don't just stumble across, the kind of places you have to look for. I grew up online, spending countless hours learning how things worked, coding, networking, even a little ethical hacking. I wasn't a professional by any means, but I knew my way around. I understood how to protect myself, how to stay anonymous. The internet was my playground, a vast, endless maze of information, and I prided myself on knowing how to navigate it. But the more time you spend on something, the more it loses its excitement. The regular web had become boring to me. Social media, streaming, forums, they all felt shallow. That's why I started exploring the dark web. Not because I had any real reason to, but because it was there. A hidden world beneath the surface, full of mystery and secrecy. At first it was nothing special, just black market sites, conspiracy forums, weird archives of books and documents that weren't supposed to exist. Most of it was exaggerated, clickbait for the paranoid, but every once in a while I'd find something truly disturbing. Something that didn't feel like it was meant to be seen. And that's where this all started. It was around 2 a.m. when I came across a discussion thread that caught my attention. It had no title, just a string of random letters and numbers, and only a handful of replies. The first post was simple. If you know, you know. If you don't, leave. I had seen cryptic messages like this before. Usually they led to some nonsense, but I was bored and I had nothing better to do. I clicked. The page that loaded was strange. A black background with a single blinking cursor like an old command prompt. No images, no links, just a text box. Enter your request. I hesitated. It looked like some kind of database, maybe an archive. I decided to test it. I typed, "Show me something interesting." For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered and a file name appeared. "Watch me, MP4. A download prompt followed. I hesitated. I knew better than to open random files from the dark web, but my curiosity got the best of me. I ran a quick scan. No viruses detected. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The video was low quality, grainy, like it had been recorded on an old phone. It showed a dark room dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. In the center of the frame was a wooden chair. Someone was sitting in it, their face covered by a white cloth sack, their hands tied behind their back. My stomach twisted. The camera was completely still, like it had been set up and left to record. No movement, no sound, just the eerie image of this bound figure sitting alone in the dark. I skipped forward, but nothing changed. No one entered the frame, no one spoke. Just silence. Then, near the end of the video, something happened. The bulb flickered more aggressively, casting sharp shadows across the room. The figure in the chair twitched slightly, just enough to let me know they were still alive. Then the screen glitched. For a single frame, something flashed across the screen. Something I barely caught before the video cut to black. I paused and went back frame by frame. When I found it, my breath caught in my throat. A face, pale, emotionless, standing right behind the chair. Someone had been there the whole time, watching. I closed the video and sat back in my chair, my skin crawling. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I had seen disturbing things before, but something about this felt different. Like I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. I closed the site and cleared my history, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. It was just a video, probably fake, some weird underground horror project. That's what I told myself. But as I sat there, staring at my screen, a notification popped up, a new message. No username, no subject, just a single sentence. "Did you like what you saw?" I felt my stomach drop. I didn't reply. I didn't even move. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen. How had they messaged me? I had used a VPN, routed my connection through multiple servers. My setup was solid. There was no way someone could have traced me. Another message appeared. "You shouldn't have watched that." I reached for my mouse, ready to shut everything down, but before I could, a final message popped up. And this time, it wasn't a question. It was my full name. And beneath it, my home address. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. No, this had to be some kind of trick, some scare tactic. Maybe the website logged IPs after all, and they were using it to mess with me. But then I saw the next line of text appear. "Mom, Dad, little sister," her full name. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just my information, they knew my family. I shot up from my chair so fast it nearly tipped over. My heart pounded in my ears as I turned around, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow in my room. My blinds were shut, my door locked. But for the first time in my life, I felt completely exposed. I turned back to my computer and slammed the power button, killing the screen instantly. My reflection stared back at me from the black monitor, my own face pale, my eyes wide with panic. I needed to think. I needed to do something. I grabbed my phone and checked the front door camera feed. Nothing. The street outside was empty, just the usual parked cars and dim streetlights. But that didn't mean I was safe. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The line rang twice before a dispatcher picked up. 911, what's your emergency? I took a breath, trying to steady my voice. I think someone's stalking me, online. They sent me my address, my family's names. I don't know how they got it. Are you home alone? Yes. Have you seen anyone outside your residence? I hesitated. No, but a notification sound went off. My phone screen lit up with a new message. Unknown number. Calling the cops won't help. My breath caught in my throat. Sir, the dispatcher asked, are you still there? I swallowed hard. Yeah, I just got another message. Do not respond, she said firmly. Stay on the line with me. I'm dispatching an officer to your location now. I wanted to believe that would help, but deep down I knew whoever this was had already gotten too close. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. I stood by the window, phone gripped in my sweaty palm, eyes locked on the street outside. Still nothing, no movement. Then, finally, blue and red lights. I let out a shaky breath as the patrol car pulled up in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the area before approaching my door. I opened it before they even knocked. You reported an online threat? One of them asked, his voice calm but serious. I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. They knew everything about me, my address, my family, everything. The older officer, Ramirez, gestured to my desk. Can you show us the messages? I hesitated before powering my PC back on. My fingers felt stiff as I moved the mouse, navigating back to the chat. But when I opened the messages, they were gone. Every single one. The thread was empty, like it had never existed. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process it. They were here, I swear. Ramirez gave me a long, unreadable look before turning to his partner. The younger cop, Hendricks, crossed his arms. Are you sure this wasn't just some elaborate prank? Huh? A wave of frustration crashed over me. No! I didn't imagine it. They sent me my family's names. Ramirez sighed. Look, we're not saying you're making this up, but if there's no evidence... Another notification sounded. My phone. I nearly dropped it as I fumbled to unlock the screen. Another message from the unknown number. Unknown number. They won't believe you. I turned the screen toward the officers, my pulse hammering in my ears. Ramirez's face darkened. He grabbed his radio. Dispatch. We have a confirmed cyber-stalking case. Requesting cyber crimes unit involvement. Hendricks glanced out the window, suddenly more alert. Did they say anything about coming here? About watching you? No, I admitted. Just that I shouldn't watch the video. Ramirez's head snapped toward me. What video? I hesitated. It was a file I downloaded from a dark website. He exhaled sharply. Christ, you have no idea who you pissed off, do you? The officers stayed with me for another hour, taking statements, checking my security setup, and advising me to stay offline for a while. They also recommended changing all my passwords and contacting my ISP for extra security measures. But none of it made me feel safer, because whoever they were still watching, and they had already proven they were always one step ahead. I didn't sleep that night, even after the cops left, even after I double-checked every lock in the house, even after I turned off my computer and put my phone on silent. I just sat there, wide awake, heart pounding. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every shadow in the corner of my room felt wrong. I tried to convince myself that the police were right, that maybe this was just some sick online prank, some hacker screwing with me for fun. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't random. Someone had been waiting for me to find that video. The next morning, I called in sick to work. There was no way I was leaving the house, not until I figured out what was happening. I spent hours combing through my system, running every security check I knew, my VPN logs, my browser history, my firewall settings. Nothing was out of place. No backdoors, no spyware, no signs that anyone had broken into my network. But if that was true, then how did they find me? I was still staring at the screen when a new email came in. No subject, no sender. Just an attachment. Watch, me MP4. My stomach twisted. I didn't open it, not this time. Instead, I right-clicked and checked the file properties. The metadata showed that it had been created just 10 minutes ago. They were still watching me. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police again. Then my screen went black. No warning, just gone. The hum of my PC cut off. The power in my entire room shut down. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. The lamp on my nightstand was still on, the hallway light still glowing under the door. The house still had power. It was just my room. Then, from the darkness of my monitor, a notification sound. My phone screen lit up. A new message. Unknown number. No more computers, let's talk. I almost threw my phone across the room. Instead, I forced my shaking fingers to type out a reply. Who are you? What do you want? 3 dots appeared. They were typing. Then the response. Come outside. A sharp, ice-cold dread gripped my spine. I stood up, moving slowly toward the window. My hands felt numb as I pulled back the curtain just an inch. And I froze. A car sat parked across the street. Black, tinted windows. The kind you see in movies when people are being watched. I squinted, trying to make out if anyone was inside. Then, as if they knew I was looking, the headlights flashed. A small, quick burst of light. I stumbled back from the window, heart slamming against my ribs. My breathing was too fast, too shallow. I wasn't imagining this. This wasn't some digital prank. They were here, watching me, waiting. I didn't reply to the message. I didn't go outside. I just backed away from the window, forcing myself to think. The police were useless. Even if I called them again, by the time they showed up, the car would be gone. I had to do something else. I had to disappear. First, I shut off my phone, pulled out the SIM card, tossed it. Then, I grabbed my laptop and drove 3 towns over to a public library. Logged into a fresh account using a brand new VPN and sent an encrypted email to a hacker forum I knew. Need to scrub my entire digital footprint. Willing to pay. I attached a Bitcoin wallet with enough to make it worth someone's time. 5 minutes later, I got a reply. Done. Don't contact us again. Just like that, everything connected to my real identity was wiped. It wouldn't stop them from finding me physically, but at least online, I was gone. I ditched my car in a crowded parking lot and took a bus back home, making sure no one followed. Then, as soon as I got inside, I packed. Not just a bag, everything. Laptop, gone. Hard drives, burned. Credit cards, cut up. By nightfall, my entire life was packed into a single duffel bag. I took one last look around my apartment. The place I had spent years in. The place that was supposed to be safe. Then, without looking back, I walked out the door. I wasn't coming back. I drove through the night, not stopping until I was at least 4 hours away from home. I paid in cash at a cheap motel off the highway, kept my head down and barely slept. Every sound outside the thin motel walls sent a jolt of panic through me. I kept imagining someone forcing their way in, dragging me out into the dark. But nobody came. By morning, I had a plan. I wasn't just running, I was disappearing completely. I took out as much cash as I could from an ATM before canceling my bank accounts. I bought a prepaid phone with cash, using it only to call my family and tell them I was leaving for a while. I didn't say why, just that they shouldn't worry. I didn't want them caught up in this. For weeks, I moved from place to place, never staying in one town too long. I worked odd jobs under the table, paid everything in cash, avoided cameras when I could. I didn't use my real name. I didn't use the internet. Eventually, the paranoia dulled. The feeling of being watched started to fade. But I never let my guard down completely. Because the truth is, I still don't know who they were. A hacker group? A secret organization? Just some lunatics who stumbled across me at the wrong time? I'll probably never know. What I do know is this. The dark web isn't just some playground for scary stories. It's real. And if you go looking for something you shouldn't, sometimes it finds you first. We had been hiking for hours, the trees growing denser and the trail narrowing, winding deeper into the forest. It was supposed to be a relaxing trip, a getaway from our busy lives, just the two of us, alone in the woods. But as the hours passed and the sun started to dip behind the canopy, the forest began to feel... The air grew heavy. The wind carried a chill that made me shiver despite the warmth of the day. Rachel, my girlfriend, didn't seem to notice. She was ahead of me, her light backpack swaying gently with each step. She had always been the braver one, the adventurous one. I had never really been a fan of the outdoors, but I had agreed to the trip. I figured it was time for me to try something new, and I wanted to make her happy. But now, as the daylight faded and the shadows stretched longer, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I glanced around, but all I saw were trees. Thick, silent, unfeeling trees. Then, we saw them. At first I thought they were hikers like us, just another couple or a group of friends out for a walk. They were standing in a clearing, talking among themselves in low voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but something about the way they stood in the middle of the woods, almost too still, made me uneasy. Rachel, always the social one, waved and called out a greeting. "Hey, you guys hiking too?" The strangers turned toward us, their faces expressionless. There were 4 of them, 2 men and 2 women. Their clothes were odd, almost outdated. It was a strange mix of modern and old-fashioned, like they didn't quite belong in the present day. But their eyes... those eyes were what unnerved me the most. They were too calm, too still. One of the men, tall with a beard and a gray jacket, smiled at Rachel's greeting. But his smile didn't seem to reach his eyes. "Yeah, we're just out for a walk," he said in a soft, monotone voice. "Where are you headed?" Rachel asked, stepping forward. "Around," the woman beside him said, her voice almost a whisper. "Around the woods." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Rachel, not sensing my discomfort, smiled brightly. "Well, we're on our way to the ridge. It's beautiful up there, perfect for watching the sunset." The strangers exchanged a brief, unreadable glance, then nodded in unison. "That sounds nice," the other man said. "Yeah," the woman added. "You should enjoy it." We stood there for a few more minutes, making small talk with them, but the longer I stayed, the more I realized something didn't feel right. Their answers were too vague, their movements too stiff. It was like they were giving me just enough to not seem odd, but not enough to make sense. Rachel was still chatting with them when I noticed it. They hadn't asked us anything. Not a single question. They didn't inquire about where we were from, what we were doing here, nothing. It was like they didn't care who we were or why we were out here in the woods. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they started to turn and walk away, moving in the same strange, synchronized way. "Take care," one of them called back, without looking over their shoulder. We watched them disappear into the trees, their movements eerily smooth. After they were gone, Rachel turned to me, still smiling. "They were nice. I didn't know how to answer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. "They were strange," I said, trying to sound casual. She laughed and patted my arm. "You're overthinking it. They were probably just out for a peaceful hike like us." I nodded, but I didn't feel any better. The deeper we went into the woods, the more I felt eyes on me, as if the trees themselves were watching. Then, about an hour later, it happened. We heard footsteps behind us. At first I thought it was another hiker, maybe someone passing by. But when I turned to look, there was no one there. I shook it off. Just my imagination, I told myself. But then it happened again. A faint rustling of leaves, the sound of something moving behind us. I looked at Rachel, but she hadn't noticed. She was too focused on the trail ahead. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice low. "Hear what?" she asked, glancing at me with a smile. "I think someone's following us," I said, my heart pounding. Rachel stopped walking and turned around, but there was no one there. "Stop freaking out," she said, laughing softly. "You're just paranoid." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake the feeling. I had been hiking for long enough to know when something was off, and something was definitely wrong. As the sun finally set, we decided to head back to the campsite. I was relieved to finally be heading in the right direction. But that's when it happened again. The sound of footsteps. I turned around quickly, my stomach dropping. There, standing in the fading light, were the four strangers. They weren't running, they weren't shouting, they were just standing there, watching us. I grabbed Rachel's arm. "We need to go, now." But as we turned to leave, I noticed something terrifying. No matter how fast we walked, the strangers were always just behind us. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, but it was too much to ignore. Each time I glanced back, they were there, walking at the same steady pace. No matter how fast we moved, they kept a perfect distance, never rushing, never running, but never falling behind either. We picked up the pace. I started to jog. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Something in my gut told me if we did, they would hear it. But they didn't move any faster. They just kept following, as silent and as still as shadows. We finally reached the edge of the woods near the parking lot, and I turned one last time. The strangers were still there, standing at the tree line, watching us. They didn't approach, they didn't say a word, they just stood there, silent, unwavering. I didn't know if we were ever going to get away. We got in the car and left without looking back. I didn't care if I was being paranoid anymore. All I knew was that the feeling of being followed wouldn't leave me, and I couldn't shake the thought that they were still out there, watching. The next day we packed up and left the area. We didn't talk much on the way back to the city, both of us silently processing the strange encounter. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, those unblinking eyes, watching from the trees, never moving closer, but always just behind us. I couldn't help but feel they had been more than just hikers. Something about their perfect calm, their synchronized movements, didn't sit right. And the worst part? They didn't need to chase us. They were always just one step behind. We didn't speak much on the drive home, both of us lost in our thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened. The evening had turned from a peaceful hike into something far more sinister. As we got closer to the city, I thought I'd finally be able to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But it lingered. The air in the car felt heavier, the road seemed darker. Every turn I took, every passing streetlight felt like it was closing in on me. Rachel was quiet, her face pale in the dim light, and I could tell she was replaying the same events over and over in her mind. We had both been unsettled by the strangers, but I couldn't tell if it was just fear or something worse that was making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As I turned onto the highway, the headlights flickered for a brief moment, and I slammed on the brakes instinctively. The car jolted to a stop, and I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding. Rachel's voice broke the silence, her tone more nervous than usual. "Did you see that?" she asked, her eyes darting nervously out the window. I blinked and looked around. There was nothing unusual about the road, just empty fields and the occasional passing car. "See what?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the tremor in it. "Back there," she insisted, "in the trees. It looked like one of them, one of the people from the woods." I looked at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. It was impossible. We were miles away from the forest now. I shook my head. "Rachel, it's just your mind playing tricks on you. We're fine." But even as I said the words, I felt the discomfort creeping back in, like something was still out there. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that we weren't alone. The sensation that we were being watched had returned, only this time it was even more intense. Every reflection in the rearview mirror felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. I kept glancing back, but there was nothing, just the dark highway behind us. When we finally arrived at the apartment, I thought I'd be able to breathe again. We had made it back to safety, away from the woods, away from the strangers. But as I got out of the car, I noticed something strange. The hairs on my neck stood up again. A set of footprints, wet, muddy, and fresh, led from the entrance of our building, disappearing around the corner of the parking lot. It couldn't be. I froze. Rachel had already gone inside, but I stood there for a moment, staring at the footprints. They led toward the entrance where we'd parked earlier, but then they turned. They veered off toward the side of the building. I felt my stomach twist. The only explanation that made sense was that someone had followed us here. Someone who had been with us in the woods. The strangers. But how had they gotten here so quickly? How had they known exactly where we were going? Later that night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises, scratching sounds at the door, soft thuds against the walls, the feeling of something watching me from the dark corners of the room. I kept checking the windows, locking and unlocking the door, even though I knew it wouldn't make a difference. My thoughts kept returning to the footprints. Had they been here? Had they watched us come in? Rachel was asleep, oblivious to the sense of dread that had taken over me. I felt paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the strangers were still with us, silently waiting for the right moment. I decided to check the balcony. The apartment was on the second floor, so there was no reason anyone could easily get up there, but I had to make sure. As I walked to the sliding door, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the darkness outside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, standing motionless at the edge of the parking lot, looking up at the apartment. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure was dressed in dark clothes, just like the strangers from the woods. I couldn't make out their face, but their posture was eerily familiar. Still, unnervingly still. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone. I woke Rachel and told her we needed to leave, but she refused. She didn't believe me. "You're just freaking out," she said, rubbing her eyes. "We're home now. It's over." But as much as I tried to calm myself, the presence outside felt real. I was convinced the strangers had followed us here. Even if they hadn't come inside, their presence loomed over us. I stayed up the rest of the night, jumping at every creak of the building, every sound that echoed in the darkness. And in the morning, when I checked the balcony again, there were no signs of anyone being there. But I knew what I'd seen. The next few days were a blur. I tried to put the whole thing behind me, tried to tell myself it was nothing more than paranoia, but I couldn't escape the feeling that they were still out there. Rachel and I started to notice things, little things that didn't add up. We found our front door slightly ajar in the mornings, the living room lights on when we were sure we'd turned them off. And one night, as I walked down the hallway, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper from the dark, like someone was standing just beyond the shadows, watching. I couldn't shake the thought that the strangers had never truly left us. Their calm, silent presence had followed us back into our lives, and no matter how far we ran, no matter how much we tried to escape the woods, they would always be one step behind. Days turned into weeks, but the unsettling feeling of being watched never truly left. Rachel and I tried to move on, to resume our lives, but something had shifted within me. The woods, the strangers, the ever-present feeling of being followed, it haunted me. It wasn't just paranoia. It was as if they were still there, lurking in the background, waiting. I couldn't shake it. I started doing some research online, looking up anything that might explain the strange events, but nothing I found felt right. No reports of missing hikers, no strange occurrences in the area, nothing that could explain what we had experienced. I even looked up the strange figures from the woods, but there was nothing, no trace of them online. It was as if they didn't exist. But the more I searched, the more I found myself spiraling. I became obsessed. I checked the locks, the windows, every corner of the apartment. I started carrying a pocket knife with me, convinced that one of those strangers would find a way inside. Every night, I checked the parking lot from the balcony, peering into the shadows, waiting for them to appear. But they never did. One night, as I was sitting on the balcony, staring into the night, I heard a faint noise behind me. I froze. I didn't need to turn around. I knew it was Rachel, but something in my gut told me not to acknowledge her. I kept my eyes trained on the parking lot, but from the corner of my vision, I saw her step into the living room. She'd been quiet lately, ever since I started obsessing over the events. I could see the concern on her face, but also something else. Exhaustion. She walked over to me and sat down beside me, her voice soft as she spoke. "You need to let it go, you know." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind kept racing, my thoughts tangled in knots. "Look," she continued, her voice full of gentle frustration. "I know you're scared, but this—" She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "This isn't helping us. We're fine. We're safe." Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. Instead, they made me feel like I was losing control of something deeper. That night, after Rachel fell asleep, I couldn't help myself. I grabbed my keys and decided to go for a drive. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get out of the apartment. The darkness of the city streets felt like a better alternative than the quiet of the apartment that had begun to feel too small. As I drove, I found myself heading back toward the woods. The familiar feeling of unease settled in my stomach, but this time, I didn't turn back. I parked near the trailhead, unsure why I'd come back here, but feeling a strange sense of closure that I hadn't felt in weeks. I walked down the trail, the soft crunch of leaves beneath my feet the only sound in the dead of night. The forest was silent, just like it had been the first time we walked through it. For a long time I stood there, breathing in the cold air, waiting. But nothing happened. The strange figures didn't appear. The oppressive feeling of being followed didn't return. I had come here expecting to see them, expecting to confront my fear, but there was only quiet. I realized then what I had been afraid of all this time. It wasn't the strangers or their silent pursuit. It wasn't the fear of being chased or watched. What had terrified me was the idea that I couldn't escape my own mind. The anxiety, the paranoia, the constant wondering if I was truly losing touch with reality. But standing there in the woods, I realized something important. They had never been following me. I had been following them. They had always been one step behind. Not because they were hunting me, but because I was the one who couldn't let go of them. My mind had twisted the experience into something darker than it ever was, building it up until it felt like a constant presence in my life. But in the end, they had never shown any aggression, never made a move against me. They were just people, strange, yes, but not a threat. And that realization was all I needed. I went home, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Rachel was still asleep when I returned, her soft breathing the only sound in the apartment. I quietly crawled into bed beside her, feeling the tension slowly drain from my body. The next morning I felt different, calmer. I knew it would take time to truly let go of the fear, but I had faced it head on, and that was enough. The strangers, the woods, the paranoia, it was all part of the journey, but it wasn't something I would let control me anymore. We didn't go back to the woods. I didn't feel the need to. But for the first time since that strange encounter, I felt at peace. The lingering fear had faded into the past. Sometimes, the only thing that follows you is the fear you hold on to. And in the end, it's up to you whether or not you let it define you.